Welcome to another Monday night live stream. What I wanted to do is start kind of fresh and start going over prophecies. And we want to look at end time prophecy for our age. We want to fill in the gaps with the Dead Sea Scrolls and comments from the church fathers. And we're going to try to make the teachings concise. On Monday nights, we will have a Q&A afterwards. But we're going to try to pull all these things together. So tonight, we're going to start basically at the very beginning. So we understand that Bible prophecy talks about things relating to Christ, to the end times, to Israel, and things like that. The basic overview to start on Bible prophecy is the book of Daniel. So we're going to go through that. Then, if we follow the directions from the Dead Sea Scrolls, we follow the teachings of the School of the Prophets. So we'll look at some of the patriarchal writings and how they interpret the minor prophets, and then we will go forward from there. And what we really want to find out is you've probably heard about the fall of the Roman Empire, the 10 nations that come up, and the Antichrist and the 7 year tribulation period. So we're going to pull those together piece by piece, make those crystal clear, and then we can speculate on how we add them together or what happens. So you probably heard people say the Antichrist might be the president of the United States, one of the ones that you don't like, for instance. That's not possible because the Antichrist comes, according to Daniel 11, from a nation north of Israel. That's not the United States. We're far, far west. So anyway, we're going to talk about things like that. So for tonight, let's get started looking at Daniel. So in Daniel chapter 2, there is a dream that Nebuchadnezzar has. And this dream is this statue. Now, if we read chapter 2, he basically says he has a dream. It scared him senseless, but he began to forget the pieces of it when he woke up. And you've probably had dreams like that. You know there was something, but you can't quite remember what it was. So he asks all the wise men to tell him the dream and interpret the dream. If they're wise and godly and connected with gods and spirits, they ought to be able to do that pretty easy. Well, none of them could. So he says, well, apparently y'all are liars. I'm going to execute you all. Well, Daniel says, let me go, very logically, home, pray, let me go to sleep, and see if the Lord will show me what he showed you. And then if I know what the dream is, I'll come back and tell you and interpret it. So he comes back to him and says, this was the dream. And Nebuchadnezzar, you know how when you vaguely begin to remind you of something, it's like, yes, that was it. So then Daniel interprets the dream. And for us, this is the basic foundation of Bible prophecy. So let's look at this. Here is a chart of basically what Nebuchadnezzar saw. And we're going to read it in a minute. But he sees this large image. And in this large image, everybody was worshiping it and this kind of stuff. And it's terrifying, whatever it is. And this stone cut from out hands, like this big meteorite, came out of the heavens, hit the thing at its feet, destroyed the entire thing, and then kind of swelled up and became a kingdom on the earth, or something like that. So that's what he saw, and it terrified him. He has no clue what any of this means. So let's go to Daniel, and we'll come back to this picture. And those, I'm going to try to do drawings like this also on the website, so you can just grab the pictures. Once you know the teachings fairly well, if you have the photos, so to speak, of the dreams or the images, um, you can understand it a lot better. So here is Daniel chapter 2. And let's see here. Let's get to verse 31. So Daniel basically says, here's the dream, and then now here's the interpretation. So we'll read this. Daniel 2:31 says, you, O king, saw, and behold, there was a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you. And the form thereof was terrible. And that word can mean bad, or it can mean just like awesome. It was just like so intense. This image's head was of fine gold. Its breast and arms were silver. Its belly and thighs were of brass. Its legs were of iron. Its feet and or its feet were partly of iron and partly of clay. And that's just weird, but these things mean something. It says, you saw, or were looking at it, in other words, until a stone was cut without hands. It's not a human made stone. Whoever carved this image apparently was a human. This is made without human hands. But it came, it says, and it smote the image on its feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. So then there was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken into pieces together, and it became like the chaff of the summer threshing floor. And the wind carried them away, and no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the entire earth. So this stone actually hit it, crushed it, basically ground it to powder, to the point that it was there was a wind and it just totally ceased to exist. And then this stone, however big it was, continued to expand until it filled the earth, became a great mountain. Now, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, mountains are usually thought of as kingdoms or empires. I shouldn't say kingdom, I should say empire. There's a difference. So he says, this is the dream, and we will tell you the interpretation before the king. So that's the dream. And now he remembers vaguely, yeah, that was it. So he says, you, O king, are a king of kings. He rules an empire over lots of different city states and countries. So he's a king of kings. For God, the God of heaven, has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. Everything that we have is given to us by God. And it says, wherever the children of men dwell, that's the entire known earth at that point, the empire. Everybody in the Middle East, wherever anybody dwells, he has control over them. So wherever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, has given into your hands, he has, and hath made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. So sometimes in these symbols, you'll have fowls and animals and people and objects representing nations or kingdoms. So you might have a lion representing one country and a bear representing another country. We'll see that later in other chapters. But he rules over all of these kingdoms or these things because he is the head of an empire. It's very important. So he is the head of gold. And this is the first place where people get confused. Are we talking about Nebuchadnezzar as a person? Like, in other words, if someone comes after him, is that his son just taking over the same kingdom and when he dies? Or you're talking about a different empire? Does the empire fall to someone else? It's like a dynasty. Are we talking about a person or a dynasty? So it says here, um, you are this head of gold. And then he explains it in verse 39 by saying, after you, it's Nebuchadnezzar, okay, shall arise another kingdom. So it's not his son or anything. Now, at this point, we'd stop just for a second if we took time to study Isaiah and several other prophecies. Several of the prophecies in Isaiah, and we will in time study those, talk about the fact that when Nebuchadnezzar takes Israel, there will be 3 generations, and then it will fall to the Medes and the Persians, specifically a guy named Cyrus. So 3 generations. It's Nebuchadnezzar, his son, his grandson, and then the kingdom falls. So at this point, we're talking about, for sure, another nation. So somebody comes in and destroys the Babylonian Empire and forms their own empire. So he says, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior. In some sense, it's inferior to the Babylonian Empire. Don't know how. But this kingdom is going to be a kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the word earth here is eretz in Hebrew, and it can mean the entire globe, or it can mean the land. And I think we're talking here about the prophecy being the land of Israel. The whole concept here is that some nation may go and take over some other nation, but it has nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with the Messiah. It has nothing to do with Bible prophecy. some country in Africa takes over some other country in, Middle East or Africa or something, and it has nothing to do with Israel at all, it wouldn't be in Bible prophecy. So it will bear rule over the entire land, including Israel, basically. Then there shall be, it's the kingdom of brass. Then a fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. Seems like I mixed over it. Oh, okay. A kingdom inferior, and then a third kingdom. So this second kingdom is the kingdom of silver. And let me just hop back here real quick. We're looking at this thing. We have a head of gold. We have chest and arms of silver, and then belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and then 10 toes of iron and clay. That's the image. So Nebuchadnezzar, or Babylon, is this head of gold. After him, his son, his grandson, Babylonian kingdom will fall, Isaiah tells us, to the Medes and Persians. So we know we're talking about empires. So at a certain point, the Medes and the Persians will come and take over all the area of Babylon, including Israel. So they will be the rulers. They will rule for a time until another kingdom comes in and takes over. And that's whatever this brass kingdom is. Brass or bronze, it can be interpreted different, but the main idea is to understand this is gold, silver, a copper alloy of some site. People get hung up on whether this is brass or bronze because it may or may not mean something else. It's just a different form of alloy, different metals mixed with copper. And then there's iron. We know what iron is. And then iron mixed with clay. And clay, we think all of these are metals, and it's important to know. We look at clay and think clay's not metal, it's just dirt, basically. Well, it's not actually. Clay hardens when you uh, bake it, basically. But one of the main ingredients in clay is aluminum, and something that they didn't identify way back when. So in reality, we're talking about gold, silver, copper alloy of some sort, iron, and iron mixed with aluminum, however that works. Okay? So let's go back and look at this again. So this is what he says. Kingdom of brass is third, and then a fourth kingdom will be as strong as iron, and inasmuch as iron breaks and subdues all things. If you were to take silver and make a silver sword and a gold sword and try to hit each other, the gold sword would fall apart a lot quicker than the silver would. Silver against brass, brass would destroy it easy. Iron against that would destroy pretty easy. So each one of these metals gets stronger and stronger until we get to aluminum, but we'll figure that part out here in a little bit. Okay, so then it says, whereas you saw the feet and the toes, partly of potter's clay, would be aluminum, partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, and in it shall be the strength of the iron, forasmuch as you saw iron mixed with miry clay. So it's going to be divided, partially strong, partially weak. As for the toes of the feet, they were part of iron and part of clay. So the feet are one thing, the toes are another. And that's one thing I want you to figure out real here in just a second. So the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. Whereas you saw the iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to the other, even as iron is not mixed with clay. So if I tried to make a stand of iron on one side and aluminum or clay, either one, on the other side, it's not going to hold together well. Now let's stop there a second, but let's go ahead and finish reading this. In the days of these kings, this is important, the kings, these 10 toes, in the days of these kings, the God of heaven set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. The kingdom will not be left to another people, but shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and shall stand forever. So that's what we call the messianic kingdom. Not the toes, but the big rock that was cut without hands, not human made kingdom, comes to earth from heaven. That's the millennial kingdom. For as much as you saw the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. The dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof is sure. Now, Daniel, we'll get to this in another study, but Daniel knows the interpretation is sure because he has records from Noah, and that's a different prophecy, but it relates to this directly. So it's really, really important we get this understood, or part of it, the main part. Then we look at Noah's testament, then we look at a few other things, and we go forward. So let's look at the chart again. So in 607 BC, the Babylonian Empire took over Israel. Okay, and then in I think 597, they took more captives. In 687, they in each time they destroyed the temple, and they continued to rule as um, Jeremiah had prophesied for 70 years. The end of which in 537 BC, the Persian Empire conquered the Babylonians. And we can talk about the historical records and the other prophecies in Isaiah sometime. But basically, we're told in Daniel 2:38 that Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and after him is another kingdom or empire. So this head of gold is Babylon ruling over Israel, starting with Nebuchadnezzar, and then his son, and then his grandson. And then some guy named Cyrus with Darius comes in and takes over the kingdom. And we see this in Daniel 5:30 and 31. So let's look at that real quick. Daniel 5:30 to see what it says. 30 and 31. So this is Belshazzar, which is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. So it's 3 generations in. They're having a party because they think they cannot be destroyed. There's Medes and Persians outside the walls trying to break in, and they think there's no way they can. They'll get fed up with it and quit and leave one day. In the meantime, we'll just have a party. So this is going on, and this strange hand appears and writes on the wall. You've heard about the handwriting on the wall. Amazing prophecy for another time. But at this point, Nebuchadnezzar, or Daniel rather, explains what's going on, and that very night, the prophecies are fulfilled. It's 70 years to the day, and the prophecies are fulfilled. And it says that night, Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, was slain. And Darius the Mede took the kingdom, being about 62 years. It's important that we know he was 62 when he took it because it relates to another prophecy. But so this shows us that the Babylonian Empire falls to the Medes and the Persians, which we also get from Isaiah and other places. So going back to our chart, we have the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, and that lasts until 323 BC, when it's taken over by the Grecian Empire. Well, Daniel tells us that too in Daniel 8, 20, and 21. So let's look at that. If we go to Daniel 8, 20, and 21, it says this is a vision he sees of a ram and a goat. And so the goat is ruling. This ram comes out of nowhere and destroys the goat. If we read this prophecy, we understand that the goat is Greece, and the ram is Persia. And so this goat comes and destroys it. So it says, the ram that you saw having the 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The rough goat, or it's actually a uni-goat, it's a goat with 1 horn at this point, is the king of Greece. That's Alexander the Great. And there's a lot of other prophecies going along with that. The great horn between his eyes is the first king. So Greece unites together to form an empire, and the first king of that united empire is that horn in this prophecy, and that's Alexander the Great. For our purposes, all we need to know is that the Medes and the Persian Empire falls to the Grecian Empire. So when we go back to here, the Grecian Empire is the copper, brass or whatever, but the copper alloy kingdom. Very, very important. And historically, we know this because 607, Babylon takes over the area of the Middle East, Israel, and it falls to the Medes and Persians in 537. exactly 70 years later, which is interesting because the prophecy said it would be exactly 70 years later. And then in 323, Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire. And at that point, Alexander dies and the empire is partitioned into four pieces. We'll see that later. But basically, two pieces have nothing to do with Israel. And we have a North and a South empire. And from that time forward, they are major problems for Israel. And we see that in chapter 11 and several other things. So at this point, then, the Grecian Empire ruling between these two, Israel being in the center, being conquered by the north and conquered by the south, conquered by the north, conquered by the south, just keeps doing this for a long time. Eventually, they gain some independence when Rome begins to come in and conquers the Egypt first, and then goes up and conquers Syria. And in the process, Rome accepts Israel as being a sovereign nation that is no threat. So they have about a 100-year period, the Maccabean period, of where they dwell safely. But then, long story short, Rome comes in and conquers Israel with Pompey, and that was 64 BC. And we see this in Daniel 11:30. So if we go to Daniel 11, and this is all about that Grecian kingdom, when you get down to verse 30, it says, for the ships of Chittim, or Kittim, that's the Hebrew word for Cyprus and Rome. So this is the Roman Empire coming in to destroy the Grecian Empire that's left. So the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved, return, and have indignation against the holy covenant, and shall do even return and have intelligence. And it goes on and talks about the rest of the stuff, the polluting of the sanctuary. And this is Antiochus Epiphanes and those things that happen. But he falls ultimately, it takes time, to the ships of Chittim, or the Roman Empire. Okay. And the Roman Empire is ruling when we get to Matthew chapter 1 and Jesus is born. The Romans are ruling. So here's the thing then. So we see from Daniel that Israel is going to be ruled over by Babylon, and that was from 607 to 537 BC. Then they were to be ruled over by the Persian Empire. That actually happened from 537 to 323. Then they're ruled over by the Grecian Empire, which a lot of variants, but it's all detailed in Daniel, from 323 to 64 BC. Basically, that's that time period. From 64 on is the Roman Empire. Now, we know in 70 AD, the temple was destroyed. And then there was a Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135. So then Israel ceased to exist. The Roman Empire continued to rule that entire area for centuries. And that's what we want to look at to try to figure this out. So the Roman Empire starts off as an empire. But if you notice up here, you've got the head of gold, which is the Babylonian Empire at the time, the chest and arms of silver, like the Medes and the Persians, the two pieces. Then there's the Grecian Empire that starts as one and fragments. And then Rome, most importantly, is iron, but it starts as one and fragments into two. And what we want to see here is this is the Eastern and the Western divisions of the Roman Empire. This is really important because, number one, we're talking about two legs. And it wasn't until 395 AD that the Roman Empire actually divided into two pieces. So it's one Roman Empire, which is pagan, and then somewhere along the line, it becomes Christian, in name only, at least. I mean, it goes from being pagan to Christian generally, but then it also splits into two. We're going to look at this in much greater detail later, but these two pieces continue for a long time. Now, what's interesting is just to take this and understand this, if the division right here starts 395 rather, almost 400 AD. What happens in history is that Rome continues, has lots of problems. They create a new Roman Empire. That Rome itself, originally when the empire was formed way back in the beginning, the capital was a city called Alba, and that was the ruling headquarters for the kings for about 400 years until Rome was completed. And then Rome, Italy, Rome actually was the head of the empire for centuries. Well, at a certain point, they decided to create Constantinople. And then when that was created, the Caesars actually picked up and moved to Constantinople and left Rome ruling with other people. So it was like two brothers at first, and then it just continued. So what's interesting then, 395 is the split. A lot of times, and you may have heard the Roman Empire fell in 476. Well, kind of. It kind of did. In 476, Western Rome, the empire itself, fell apart and was destroyed. The Pope continued to rule from Rome, so it's a different kind of, not an empire, but a power, but ruling kind of separately. There's no empire. But the Byzantine Empire on the east from Constantinople continued to rule until 1453 rather BC, or AD, excuse me, 1453 AD. During this time period, however, there was 400 years without a Western Roman Empire. Then the Pope of Rome commissioned the creation of a Holy Roman Empire in the East. Again, not to attack or anything, but just to reconstitute a part of the empire that fell apart. So he starts this in 800 AD, more or less, around 800, with Charlemagne, and it goes from Charlemagne through the Franks and on up to the Germans. The capitals move. So the capitals move up, and we get up to Germany, basically ruling the Holy Roman Empire. It's recognized as the Holy Roman Empire, which you might want to argue is not really the Roman Empire, but of the power that rules from Rome, Italy, created an empire. That's really a Roman Empire. I mean, there's really no way around that. Well, that continues up into the 1800s when it begins to fizzle and then begins to come back. So at this point, 1453 AD, the Byzantine Empire falls to the Ottomans, the Ottoman Empire, the Turks. Now, the religion then would change from being Christian to Muslim, but in a sense, it's still a ruling empire from Constantinople. Nothing has really changed. Remember, in the beginning, Rome was pagan, then it became Christian, and now it's become Muslim, so to speak. Religions change, empires, dynasties change, but empires kind of stay the same. So Germany is fizzling out in the late 1800s with Napoleon Bonaparte. So what's going to happen is eventually Germany tries to reunite, recreate the empire, and that causes what we know to be World War One. And so at the end of World War One, the empire was not reconstituted, but the Ottoman Empire that sided with Germany to try to reconstitute this whole thing was broken up by the Allied forces. So, no matter how you look at it, 1917 was kind of the end of the empire. But then 20, 30 years goes by, and we all know Adolf Hitler rises to power in Germany. And of course, what they want to try to do is recreate the empire. That lasts about 7 years, and it causes World War II, the end of which is the empire is completely shattered. Germany is split in half, and everything supposedly is fixed. The Ottoman Empire is gone, all this is gone. So it still tends to be broken up like that. So that's why down here we have AD 1945 as the end of the empires, as far as the two legs are concerned. Now, what's going to happen is somehow the parts of this empire, the iron parts, are going to mix with the aluminum or clay parts and form an empire of 2 feet, like 2 arms, like 2 legs. And then eventually out of that is going to come 10 toes, a confederated system of 10 nations coming together to form an empire. And in the days of the toes, those 10 kingdoms, that's when the second coming of Jesus Christ occurs. And that is the basic prophecy. So what we need to figure out is these things. This all helps us. I mean, gold, silver, copper, and in a sense, iron is all gone. But when you begin to understand the Roman Empire didn't fizzle out in 1453 or 476, 1945, very important. Some people might say 1917, but there are other prophecies, one specific I'm thinking of in a scroll that dates the time periods, the not by day or hour, but by um, capitals when the empire moves from here to here. And if you look at that prophecy, it has to be World War II we're talking about, so 1945. So very, very important. So at this point, we'll stop with this because this is, if you haven't ever went through this before, this is a major, major thing to wrap your head around. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream that says, starting with him, there's going to be these empires that's going to end in a messianic kingdom. Okay. And so a lot of people say it's the church, but it can't be because of the division of the Roman Empire and the continuation. Oh, this whole thing is not over before Rome becomes Christian. That happens way back here. So we're talking about a Protestant pre-tribulational, premillennial view of prophecy. So very, very important. And the scrolls and the church fathers have the same exact view. So basically, for us to know that it's Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, Rome ends in 1945, most likely. Unless, of course, it hasn't. Again, I could see you thinking 1917, but then there was Hitler in World War II. So, depending on how the rest of the prophecies play out, it may actually not be completely over yet. Whatever happens is going to happen quickly because there's not that much time left. But we want to look at these things going forward and see many of these other things. There's several other prophecies for this particular time period. So we're going ahead and stop there for tonight. We'll come back next week and pick up where we left off and try to go studying the Roman Empire stuff. And I think it'll be interesting. God bless you guys.